Gwinnett County teenager and her boyfriend are accused of killing her grandparents. New this hour, investigators tell us they also plan to commit more murders. Channel 2's Tony Thomas is live near Lawrenceville with who was on their hit list and why their plan failed. Tony?
Jovita, detectives say the young teenage girl confessed to killing her grandparents, but also said she and her boyfriend had plans to kill other family members, including her mother, as well.
Also stated that they were planning on killing Johnny's family, and there was plans on killing her mother also.
But Gwinnett County police say Cassandra Bjorge told them in a taped confession her boyfriend, Johnny Ryder, backed off the plans when he spotted cars he didn't know parked in the family's driveway.
Johnny says basically to keep on driving.
Both Ryder and Bjorge sat in court Wednesday listening to police outline the case against them. They're accused of not only murdering Wendy and Randall Bjorge in early April, but trying to kill Ryder's sister and her boyfriend. Ryder's sibling escaped, and that led to the teens' capture more than a week after the grandparents' murders. Teens used a tire iron, hammer, baseball bat, and butcher knives to beat and slice the throats of the grandparents. Police say Cassie admitted the teens stayed in the home smoking pot for days as her grandparents' bodies laid upstairs.
No comment.
After court, Bjorge's mother didn't react to hearing she was also on a hit list, but earlier with her attorneys, she asked for support.
Not in a million years did I ever think something like this would ever happen.
If you love chilling crime stories like this, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel for more chilling stories. In the spring of 2017, Lawrenceville, Georgia, appeared like any small American town. Sidewalks were lined with trees just beginning to bloom. Cars glided along familiar streets, and neighbors waved at one another in the early morning sun. Among them, a modest home on Furlong Run held two people whose lives seemed ordinary, even serene. Randall and Wendy Bjorge were in their early 60s. Neighbors remembered them as kind, dependable, and quietly generous. Wendy tended her garden with meticulous care, sharing flowers with neighbors. Randall worked on small projects around the house, always ready to lend a hand. Together, they embodied stability in a neighborhood where normalcy was taken for granted. They were grandparents in the truest sense, often welcoming family into their home. Their granddaughter, Cassandra Bjorge, had lived there intermittently, drawn to their sheltering presence. But beneath this surface of calm, there were tensions only visible to those paying close attention. Teachers noticed Cassandra's absences. Friends noticed mood swings and isolation. Family members reported arguments and behavioral issues. And yet, in the quiet of their home, Randall and Wendy carried on, perhaps unaware of how fragile that balance had become. One morning in April, that balance shattered. Relatives had not heard from the couple for days. Calls went unanswered. Text messages were ignored. When concern grew too heavy to ignore, a welfare check was requested. Police arrived at the Furlong Run home, expecting perhaps a minor medical issue or an absent family member. Instead, they encountered a silence that was unnatural, oppressive, and foreboding. Inside the home, something was irrevocably wrong. Officers immediately secured the scene. Neighbors watched from across the street, unable to reconcile the quiet, orderly home with the sense of foreboding that now hung over the property. The news spread quickly. By the afternoon, the local authorities had confirmed that both Randall and Wendy Bjorge had died. Shock rippled through the community. This was not a burglary or a random act of violence. The police quickly realized the perpetrator was someone known to the family. The early investigation suggested that the home had been inhabited after the deaths. Items had been moved, vehicles had been used, digital traces and witness statements pointed to the presence of Cassandra Bjorge and her boyfriend, Johnny Ryder. It was a revelation that stunned both neighbors and family. The quiet suburban life of Lawrenceville had been shattered from within. Questions immediately arose. How could a home that had been a place of safety become a site of tragedy? What led two young people to turn against the very family that had sheltered them? And how did the warning signs, the calls to police, and the behavioral patterns fail to prevent what was about to unfold? Police and investigators began to piece together the timeline, a complex web of movements, digital footprints, and personal interactions. Every message sent, every store visited, every minor disturbance reported by neighbors became a thread in the unfolding story. In this first chapter, the quiet town of Lawrenceville came face to face with an unthinkable truth. Danger sometimes hides in familiar places, and the people we trust most can harbor intentions that even the closest family members cannot foresee. The question that lingered in the minds of all who heard the news was simple, yet haunting. How does a family home, meant for love and care, become the stage for one of the most shocking crimes in the county's history? That question would follow the investigation, the trial, and the reflection on what could have been done differently. It would mark the beginning of a story that examined not just the crime, but the fractures within a family, the psychology of young offenders, and the broader lessons for society. Every tragedy has roots, and the Bjorge case was no exception. Cassandra Bjorge was only 17, but she carried a weight that exceeded her years. She had spent her life navigating fractured family dynamics, academic struggles, and periods of instability. Those closest to her recalled a bright but distant teenager, one who could be charming at times, withdrawn at others, and unpredictable in her moods. Cassie's upbringing had its challenges. Though the grandparents provided care and structure, there had been prior disruptions in her home life. Police records would later reveal repeated calls to the household over domestic disputes, truancy, and behavioral issues. Teachers and school counselors had attempted interventions, but the pattern of rebellion, isolation, and secrecy continued. Johnny Ryder, a 19-year-old boy who had entered her life during this period, became a significant influence. Together, they formed a bond that was intense, insular, and increasingly focused on their shared frustrations with family authority. Their relationship was a feedback loop. Johnny's presence amplified Cassandra's anger, resentment, and desire for independence. Both teenagers drifted further from external oversight. Friends and neighbors noticed frequent absences, sudden disappearances, and erratic behavior, yet few fully understood the gravity of what was brewing beneath the surface. In retrospect, these were the warning signs, behaviors, interactions, and decisions that hinted at escalation. The grandparents, meanwhile, continued to act as stabilizing forces. Randall and Wendy welcomed Cassandra and Johnny into their home at various points, believing that guidance and proximity could steer the teens back towards safety and responsibility. They trusted their family's bond, hoping that care and structure could counter the rebellion and turmoil. But trust alone, as investigators would later note, is fragile when combined with unresolved conflict, mental health struggles, and unchecked resentment. Psychologists later examined this dynamic. They noted that adolescent brains are particularly vulnerable to peer influence, heightened emotional responses, and poor impulse control. When isolation, perceived injustice, and persistent anger combine, young minds can spiral toward catastrophic decision-making. Cassandra and Johnny were an extreme example, a partnership that reinforced each other's fantasies of rebellion, entitlement, and detachment from the consequences of their actions. Family friends recalled subtle signs of friction. Cassie would argue aggressively with her grandparents over household rules. Johnny was sometimes seen attempting to mediate, but also to encourage defiance. Neighbors described strange late-night behaviors, fleeting disappearances, and cryptic conversations. All of these factors created an environment in which tension escalated, but no one foresaw the outcome. Even as the teens plotted, the rest of the family clung to hope. The grandparents, their children, and cousins continued routines and visits, unaware of the scope of the danger in their midst. The duality of a home that was nurturing on the surface, yet dangerous underneath, set the stage for tragedy. It was a case study in how ordinary family life, even with love and structure, can conceal fractures capable of producing irreversible consequences. This chapter of the story reminds us of a sobering truth. Sometimes, the most catastrophic threats come not from strangers, but from those we trust most. And in families where tensions, mental health struggles, and peer influence intersect, the potential for disaster can escalate silently, unnoticed until it is too late. The question that began to emerge in the minds of investigators and neighbors alike was not simply who or why, but how could this have been prevented? That question would follow every step of the investigation, every courtroom appearance, and every reflection on lessons learned. It was a question without an easy answer, one that lingered like a shadow over Lawrenceville and the Bjorge family. The early days of April 2017 began like any other in Lawrenceville. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware that inside a familiar home, the fabric of a family was beginning to unravel. Wendy and Randall Bjorge, who had long been pillars of stability, were suddenly unreachable. Calls went unanswered. Text messages lingered, ignored. At first, relatives chalked it up to normal busyness, a missed day, or a quiet moment of privacy. But as hours stretched into days, concern deepened into alarm. The grandparents' absence was uncharacteristic, and those closest to them sensed that something was seriously wrong. By April 8th, a formal welfare check was requested. Local police arrived at the furlong-run home, expecting perhaps an ill family member or minor emergency. What they found instead would shock the neighborhood and launch an intensive investigation. The house, outwardly unchanged, bore subtle signs of disruption. Mail had begun to pile on the counter. Lights flickered inconsistently. Small domestic routines, cups of coffee left cold, newspapers unopened, spoke of absence. Yet no signs pointed to a typical emergency. Inside, the officers discovered evidence that the home had been occupied in unusual ways after the absence of its longtime residents. The details suggested intimate knowledge of the household, someone who had moved freely within walls that had once been safe. Investigators immediately considered all possibilities, but the evidence increasingly pointed inward. Cassandra Bjorge, the granddaughter, and her boyfriend, Johnny Ryder, emerged as central figures in the unfolding narrative. Digital records showed their movements in the days leading up to the discovery. Surveillance footage captured the teenagers leaving and returning to areas near the home. Phone records indicated ongoing communication between the two, forming patterns that investigators later interpreted as preparation and concealment. Relatives, friends, and neighbors were interviewed. A picture emerged of two young people who had spent considerable time in the home, had access to keys, and knew the routines of the grandparents intimately. Witness accounts suggested tension and conflict had been rising for months. Teachers and counselors described behavioral red flags, aggression, truancy, and emotional volatility. No one could have imagined that the combination of these factors would culminate in tragedy. The police timeline began to converge. The teens were absent from their usual haunts. Their friends noted that they were acting strangely. Cell phone ping data placed them near the grandparents' house repeatedly in the days leading up to the discovery. By piecing together minor details, purchases at local stores, attempts to interact with peers, and movements around the neighborhood, investigators began to reconstruct what had occurred. Perhaps most chilling was what came next. Statements from Cassandra and Johnny after their apprehension revealed not only involvement in the deaths of their grandparents, but also a broader, darker plan. According to law enforcement, the teenagers had discussed the possibility of harming additional family members before they're captured. Investigators described this planning as calculated, though the specifics were interrupted by intervention. It was a revelation that cast a shadow over the tragedy and raised profound questions about intention, psychology, and prevention. For the Lawrenceville community, the discovery marked a turning point. No longer was the tragedy a private family matter. It became a public case that would challenge assumptions about youth, family, and safety. Officers and investigators emphasized the unusual nature of the crime. These were not impulsive acts by strangers. This was intimate knowledge, planning, and betrayal. The immediate question remained: how could the signs have been missed? How could a family, so outwardly ordinary, face such internal danger? And what would the police uncover next as they unraveled the timeline, traced movements, and prepared to confront the suspects? These questions would carry the investigation forward, deepening the shadow of unease over a town that had once believed in the safety of its own streets. As the investigation unfolded, the Lawrenceville Police and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation approached the case with meticulous care. Every detail mattered: small objects, phone records, neighborhood observations, and witness accounts. Detectives reconstructed timelines, piecing together the movements of Cassandra Bjorge and Johnny Ryder before, during, and after the tragedy. It became clear that this was not the result of random chaos. Every step showed knowledge, intent, and a troubling pattern of planning. Investigators interviewed family members, friends, and neighbors, gradually building a portrait of two teenagers whose relationship had grown intense and insular. They traced Cassandra's prior behavioral issues, truancy, arguments, and police visits to the household over domestic disputes. Johnny, slightly older, had reinforced her isolation and resentment. Together, they were a duo whose dynamic magnified impulses and blurred judgment. Forensic teams analyzed the home and surrounding areas. Digital footprints, including social media interactions and search histories, were mapped carefully. Credit card and store records were examined to confirm movements. Officers noted that the suspects had remained in the home for a period after the deaths, using vehicles and contacting friends, all of which painted a picture of detachment and planning rather than spontaneous reaction. One of the most chilling discoveries came from statements and notes found during the investigation. Authorities reported that Cassandra and Johnny had discussed harming other family members before being apprehended. Though these plans never came to fruition, the knowledge that they had intended additional violence highlighted the depth of premeditation and the potential danger of unchecked youth behavior. Every day of the investigation added layers to the story. Witness statements, behavioral analysis, and the careful processing of evidence built a narrative that was as unsettling as it was compelling. The case became a study in warning signs ignored, in the consequences of isolation and resentment, and in the fragile line between adolescence and accountability. For the investigators, every new discovery raised new questions, and for the community, every answer only deepened the sense of unease. The courtroom in Gwinnett County became the stage for a story that had already shaken a community. Cassandra Bjorge, 17, and Johnny Ryder, 19, faced the legal system for the deaths of Wendy and Randall Bjorge. For prosecutors, the challenge was complex, balancing the teenagers' age with the severity of their actions. For the family, it was an emotional trial, a confrontation with grief, betrayal, and the unimaginable. From the start, the proceedings were solemn and meticulous. Psychologists testified about adolescent development, peer influence, and the psychological state of the accused. Experts described patterns of detachment and escalation that investigators had identified, behaviors that, left unchecked, could spiral into catastrophic outcomes. Cassandra and Johnny had demonstrated knowledge of right and wrong, and the level of planning indicated a deliberate, conscious decision rather than impulsive misjudgment. Courtroom observers noted the atmosphere, quiet, tense, and heavy with unspoken sorrow. Family members, though devastated, attended each day, hoping for clarity, justice, or perhaps some form of closure. Prosecutors carefully presented timelines, forensic evidence, and witness statements. They showed how digital footprints, purchases, and movements confirmed what investigators had already pieced together. The teenagers had not acted spontaneously, but with planning and intent. The defense presented mitigating factors. They described turbulent home dynamics, behavioral struggles, and the psychological influence of peer relationships. While these details provided context, they did not absolve responsibility. The court considered these factors alongside the clear evidence of premeditation, including statements made by the teens about harming additional family members. Ultimately, both Cassandra and Johnny accepted responsibility for their actions through pleas. The judge, acknowledging the gravity of the case and the potential danger they posed, handed down life sentences without the possibility of parole. The verdicts closed the formal chapter of the case, but they left an enduring sense of unease. The family had legal closure, but emotional closure remained elusive. This stage of the story emphasized a truth difficult to confront. Justice can be served, but the damage caused by fractured relationships and unchecked behavior can never be fully undone. The courtroom had answered the question of accountability, but it could not restore lives lost or erase the psychological scars left on the surviving family and community. In the minds of many, the trial became more than legal procedure. It became a reflection on family, adolescence, and the consequences of ignoring warning signs. And even as sentences were read, the haunting question lingered. How could ordinary teenagers, living under the roof of their own family, spiral into actions that would alter so many lives forever? In the years following the trial, the Bjorge case remained etched into the memory of Lawrenceville. The house on Furlong Run was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol of the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of youth, and the hidden fractures that can exist even in familiar places. Neighbors whispered about what had happened, while family members sought privacy, attempting to rebuild lives disrupted forever. The case sparked conversations beyond the immediate community. Social workers referenced it in discussions about at-risk teens, the influence of peer relationships, and the importance of mental health awareness. School counselors and psychologists studied the patterns in Cassandra and Johnny's behavior as cautionary examples. Isolation, unchecked anger, and reinforcement of destructive ideas can escalate into irreversible consequences. Law enforcement agencies used the investigation as a case study in the importance of coordination, thorough evidence collection, and early intervention in domestic situations. For the surviving family, grief remained private and profound. They established scholarships and quietly engaged with community programs to honor the memory of Wendy and Randall Bjorge. The legal closure provided by sentencing offered structure, but emotional healing was far more complex. The loss was permanent, the questions persistent, and the reminder of vulnerability ever present. In Cassandra and Johnny's case, the combination of adolescent development, peer influence, family tension, and perceived grievances created a perfect storm. It is a reminder that even ordinary-seeming families can harbor complexities and dangers that remain invisible until catastrophe strikes. The community's response was measured, somber, and reflective. Law enforcement, social services, and educators all sought to learn from the incident, applying lessons to prevent similar tragedies in other households. Memorials were small and private, reflecting the family's desire for dignity and remembrance rather than spectacle. For many, the story became a haunting reminder that evil is not always distant or unknown. It can emerge within the places we believe are safest. And as the story of Cassandra Bjorge and Johnny Ryder recedes into the annals of legal record, the questions endure. How can families recognize warning signs before it is too late? What responsibilities do communities and institutions hold in preventing escalation? And ultimately, how do we reconcile the ordinary with the unimaginable, knowing that the consequences of youth, isolation, and anger can forever alter the lives of those we love? The tragedy remains, not just as a headline, but as a dark reflection of human complexity. And decades later, the question lingers: how well do we truly know the people closest to us? If you love chilling crime stories like this, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel for more chilling stories.